So thank you all for joining us for Canada's Farm Transition Day. It's an important day. Can be a challenging topic, but it's important for the longevity of our family farms in Canada and of course food security, not only in Canada, but around the world with all of the exporting that we do. Before we jump right into things, I'd like to hand things over to Kevin from AFSC to do some opening and welcome. AFSC is one of our incredible partners with Do More Ag, and these webinar series are thanks to our partnership with them. So Kevin, thank you for joining us and thank you for bringing us words from AFSC.
Yeah, thank you, Megs, and thank you for the opportunity to share some opening comments today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Farm Transition Day Fireside Chat. Events like this one speak to the depth and maturity of our industry. We can look beyond the day-to-day and recognize the need to plan for the future of our individual operations and the industry as a whole. As Megs mentioned, my name is Kevin Shawnett. I'm the Vice President of Lending at Agriculture Financial Services. We are extremely proud to be supporting this event and the important work of the Do More Agriculture Foundation. We've come together today to recognize the great work that Canada's producers are doing to protect and nurture our industry by facing farm transition head on. It can often be a difficult topic, full of emotions on both sides, but Canadian farmers are doing the work. Today's discussion is a good reminder that farm transition is a journey and that as an industry, we can realize positive outcomes together. In my experience within the agricultural sector over the past 20 years, I've seen firsthand both positive and negative outcomes relative to farm transition. Producers who partner with industry specialists and who are proactive in their journey typically have better outcomes. Farm transition is a complex process, but it doesn't have to be scary. Accepting it as a process and being open-minded are also key ingredients to success. The future of farming relies on successful generational transitions and setting the stage so the next generation can continue to build on current successes and those still in the making. At AFSC, we are humbled and honored to be able to play a part in those transition journeys, and I look forward to listening and learning more about this important topic during today's session. Thank you, and back to you, Megs.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'll just quickly start with some housekeeping things. Feel free to keep your camera off, change your name, do whatever makes you feel comfortable to participate in today's webinar, Fireside Chat. We are talking about things that are connected to mental health and how mental health plays into some of these important discussions and interactions within the family dynamic. So please prioritize your own mental well-being. If at any point you need to step back or step away from the webinar, please do that. There may be things that we say that somebody else say that just because of what you've either gone through or going through, they might act as triggers. So please protect yourself. The way we like to do this is we want to try for this to be as interactive as possible. So please don't feel like you have to hold your comments or questions to the end. We welcome them throughout. If you feel more comfortable private messaging me a comment or question, please do so and I can read that. And that way your anonymity is reserved. I also have Michaela on the call. She's with Do More, so she'll help monitor the chat. Michaela, I'll get you to post our resource page link, please. So if anyone does need to leave, there will be resources for anyone to connect to or talk to if you are going through something. With that, I'd like to formally welcome everyone to our Farm Transition Day Fireside Chat. And I would like to introduce Mona Cooley and Bob Tosh, who are our panelists today. They're going to do a much better job of introducing themselves and their connections to family and to agriculture. So to start things off, I'm going to hand things over to Bob and then to Mona.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me. So perhaps, Megs, if you can give me a thumbs up just to make sure that you can hear me good. We've just had some technology that hasn't gone according to plan, so apologies for that. So my name's Bob Tosh. If you're very astute, you'll hear an accent. So I originate from the UK. I actually originate from a farm in Ireland and a farm that's gone through its own transition processes. I have an ag background and a family enterprise advisors background. I came to Canada almost exactly 15 years ago and came to Saskatoon and began working with farm families in Saskatchewan, and that has extended to across Canada. And one of the things that I started to focus on was intergenerational transition work. And so that's primarily the focus I have. I'm a partner with MMP, but we happily work with clients from all over the country and all over the provinces that might not necessarily be attached to MMP in terms of working through the transition process.
Thanks, Bob, and welcome. Mona?
Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning, even after all our technology stuff. Well, pleased to be here. And if you have been on other calls where I've been speaking, basically, I'm a farm girl. My husband's a farm guy, and we got married, but we moved out a year later to Calgary. And the reason was, it was Ted's, that's my husband's farm, could not accommodate both families. And so that transition happened that one brother said, no, I'm staying back home. And obviously we moved out to Calgary, and that was our beginning of it. I also have living on the farm. I've had two brothers. Unfortunately, one was killed in an accident, and recently my other brother passed away in November. But what I can say with this farm transition is that it can be complicated, it can be scary, as mentioned. But I have seen where within our own family, how our farming has, my brother that just passed away had made the transition and started the process to allow his one son that was at home and wanted to be part of the farming community and living on the farm and doing all of those pieces. And that has recently just happened, and that was all in the plan as well. The other farm, my home farm where I lived, is still with my nephew and his wife. They are retired, they're still farming. I'm not sure that we're going to see what transition happens with that farm, but that's still in the works of what they do, but they're still living there and continuing the work. Went from dairy to just all crops and everything else. They downsized in order for them to help. And also I bring in mental health, and our daughter was diagnosed in 1995 with mental health, bipolar disorder. So I bring that piece to the family and the family dynamics. And our own family had to work through many challenges to get to where we are today, that we're working together. Yes, we have challenges too, and we have our differences of opinion, but we get through them because we've learned what to do and how to be supportive to each other through difficult times. And I am grateful. I have a daughter that is the one that was diagnosed with bipolar, has joined my company. And so that transition is already in place. So that's a little scoop on me.
And for those of you who haven't heard Mona talk before, she works with families. And so that is part of why she's here today as part of our panel. I think to kick things off, I would love to touch on, because I do a lot of traveling around Canada, and one of the main topics that farmers talk to me about, no matter where I seem to end up, is that transition piece. And I've been in different settings where everyone has kind of their thought on how to handle the emotions of it, because there can be so much emotion that's brought into the conversation. And so I've been in groups where that's kind of where they're stuck right now, is with the emotion and not sure how to move forward with that in the room. And then I've talked to others where they said we understood that the emotion that was coming into it was becoming challenging to the process. So we just decided as a group, as a family, to say we're going to take the emotion completely out of this, just deal with the business and move forward that way. So I'm curious, Bob and Mona, what would your thoughts be or your recommendations be? I haven't been through farm transition myself, but I feel just in life in general, if you're putting that emotion to the side, at some point you have to pick it back up and deal with it. So just curious what your thoughts are on kind of those two schools of thinking, whether it's working through emotions as you work through the transition, or just setting them aside and moving through the transition on its own?
I'll go first. It's interesting that most people really want to make rational decisions, but in truth, most of us still make emotional decisions. And the challenge with the farm is that it's a very emotional thing. So often we think of farms as being legacy assets, and legacy assets carry an awful lot of baggage with them in terms of history and responsibility and emotion. And the other thing with family farms, it's often home, and so that again carries an awful lot of emotion with it. And so it'd be interesting to see how those families who suggest that they can park the emotions and just make business decisions, how truly effective that is in the long term. So my suggestion is always not to try and park the emotion, but try and manage it. And what that really means is I say this to most farm families: formality will be your friend. So it's trying to formalize the process so that when people get emotional, or there's some angst or anger or something comes to the surface, there's a setting in which we can manage that. And so that formal systems of decision making help manage what are inevitably going to be emotional decisions.
Yeah, I like that. It's having your, like if you're bowling, putting the bumper rails up if you've never done it before. So there's kind of that guidepost to getting through that.
Absolutely. So you understand that, like it's kind of like if you think of the analogy of allowing your kids to go and play in the road, it's like, well, that's probably not a good thing. So let's put some rules around it. We've got to teach them how to cross the road and how to avoid, the traffic. But at the same time, there's some skills that we do need them to learn. And so it's a little bit like that. You're putting in place some formalized process. So it gives structure to conversations that can very easily go offside very quickly. As people, if they move into their, I use the term lizard brains, they've lost any kind of reason. And so we've got to be able to move them back. And so, things like anger or feelings of being hurt, we've got to be able to have open and honest conversations where differences of opinion don't become personalized. And really that needs a formalized setting to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of us have never necessarily had the training to do that, or the experience or the practice.
Well, you look at the family system. So, the family system is an informal system. Mum and dad, they are the kind of keeper of the keys and the rules, the creators of rules, and every family has its own values, and every family has its own, some families never shout at each other, whereas other families shouting at each other is a very normal part of their communication process. So they're all different, but when you think of that informal system of communication where you have birth order and gender biases, and then all of a sudden now we're trying to have a conversation about the business and about ownership. Yeah, good luck if you don't have some sort of facilitator in the room to navigate through that. And so that's why an awful lot of families get stuck, because they don't have those guidelines in place. And brother number one is used to shouting at brother number two. So guess what? We're going to do that instead of being able to move forwards.
Mona, what are your thoughts?
like to add to what Bob is already saying. I think conversations are missing in lots of this. I think part of it is. And when these transitions are happening, I think there's conversations that need to be had, because I think there's times that if we don't have conversations of that, talk about that transferring or transitioning and everything else, but it also, what is happening within the families and what are their conversations on a daily basis? That's the thing that I wonder about, the relationships and everything else, because lots of times we go along and we do these things and we don't think of the transition, but when it was coming close, but we still haven't had those honest conversations, as Bob has mentioned. And lots of times we don't take the time to sit down and really listen to what people are having to say or input, and also understand what's being said and not taking it personally, which was also said, but having those conversations and learning that tool of listening to others, getting clarifications, because lots of times people have perspectives of what the other person's saying, but we move on, we don't get clarity, and then we're frustrated. So these conversations, if they don't start before that, there's probably transitions going to be happening years down the road here. It's going to be very difficult to have those conversations. And will they stick together? Will they have those conversations? And will it break apart? And I know with my brothers that I had living on the farm, it was hard when that transition. My one brother decided to leave the partnership with the one brother and move to his own farm. And that was very complicated, and conversations were heated and very frustrating and everything else. And that's made it difficult because, you know, the expectation was we're going to stick together and we're going to carry on, that there's no changes. And there's where these expectations become of what somebody else thinks should be done, and the other saying, no, I'm not going to continue doing that, and I'm going to moving on. So the thing is, how do we start those conversations? And it's starting years before we maybe are thinking of these transitions and what they're happening, is my thoughts on this, and adding to what Bob has already said.
And if, with the work that you do with individuals and families, what are some skills or coping mechanisms that you teach to deal with when that generational trauma comes into how someone is approaching something, whether that's through creating boundaries or just having a better understanding of how to have those conversations? Because that's one of the pieces that I see come up too. I was speaking with a farmer in Nova Scotia last year, and they were saying that we don't know a lot of how that prior transition went on, but we know that it was not a good experience. And what we've gotten from our dad is very much like, well, this is how I had to go through it, so this is how you're going to have to go through it, and kind of passing that hurt because of that trauma that's still there on. So what recommendations do you have for like how to build healthy boundaries and maybe set up some of that communication so that you don't just stay stuck in that loop of that's where things are going to be and that's how it's going to go?
Right.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Bob, go ahead.
I think it's important to allow for coaching and a little bit of like it's easy for us as professionals to say, yeah, let's stop taking things personally and let's learn how to communicate in a way that we don't get angry. But again, we're emotional people, so how do we have to learn and we have to unlearn the very informal communication systems that families grew up with. And so there's no way that that's just an overnight switch. And it's no good, someone just saying thou shalt and everyone will obey. That isn't how this works. So it certainly, in terms of tools, I would recommend families where they feel that we talk about relationship capital, where their relationship capital might not be as strong, where there might be some tension in the room, that they do have some facilitation in order to allow the family to learn how to communicate in a sort of respectful, because respect is always something that family members want. And I'm going to use the word rational, but at least in a way that where people feel safe, because I think that's the key. Is you have to feel safe, and sometimes a facilitator can offer that safety net.
Yeah, and I think coaching through the process, and that's one of the pieces that we work very hard on in our program that we do, families helping families. And one is on the road to honest conversations, but it's each individual looking at themselves first. And we have 34 statements that people can look at them. And I'll give you an example, because examples always help better than anything else. So one is, I can express thoughts and feelings without the fear of receiving personal criticisms from others. Do you feel that's always? Do you feel it sometimes? Do you feel it rarely or never? Which of those? And this is your personal feelings, and really looking at yourself. That's part of it. It isn't just everybody else but yourself, and taking a look. And the other one is, I'm able to accept and be okay with whatever I'm feeling in the moment, and I'm able to then express that emotion in an appropriate manner. You assessing yourself is one step that you can take, and that's what we do in the 34 pieces. But then there's the other piece. And when individuals come into our session, it's usually, family supporting a loved one living with mental health or addictions or these conflicts. And they have to look at themselves and assess it. But there is a piece that we ask them to do, is to go home, because there's a family piece that we offer, and that they go home because they learn the tool, listen, understand, and validate. That's what they learn first in the session, because listening, are we really listening, or are we thinking of what to say next? Or are we understanding, and you hear something and it kind of irks you? Are you asking for more clarification? What do you mean when you say this? And then validate when things are right. Are we validating that? Are we even taking the time? So what I ask the participants to do is to go home, and they take the sheet that I have for families. And what they do is ask the same different questions, and let the family member answer without, and the one that's asking the questions is to listen. And it's so interesting, and we have about 10 or so that the families to answer. And when they do that, it's interesting what that other family member, because the participant is to go home and say, I'm going to listen to hear what you have to say. And you can say whether it's always, never, or it isn't at all. And it's interesting what they bring up. They don't always bring up the negative of what is happening. They sometimes bring up, well, this is better. Some families are shocked that they even thought that it was even better. For instance, family engages in honest, healthy conversations to empower each other. One family member, actually, when she went home to ask their family member, she says, well, yeah, you are pretty good at that. And she wasn't thinking she was, because of all the different conflicts. But if you don't hear the other side, then you're having a perspective of it. So it's just one tool, but I've put in 2 tools in that whole process. And it is coaching and facilitating that process, and having them to practice these tools as well.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of really important things of, one, listening to actually listen, because we do operate more in the mindset when someone's talking, we're formulating our own response. So we're not really listening to what they're saying. So actively listening. And then that validation is really important. And it's not just validating if you think that person is right or they're saying what you want them to say. It's validating that what that person is saying, what they're feeling, that's their truth. It doesn't matter if you're feeling something different, if you're thinking something different, if you would be reacting differently. What they're expressing to you, that's their truth. And so validating that, again, doesn't necessarily mean you agree with them, but you're showing them that you're creating a safe place for them to be open and honest with you. and you're not negatively reacting to that because that's just where they're at. I think that's so important. And then your comment on like practicing the tools, I like to think of it as we don't send athletes to the Olympics with no training. And so the time to start practicing these tools and incorporating tools into our own lives for being able to have conversations, being able to listen, to validate, to maybe do some breathing if we need to bring ourselves down for how the emotions we're feeling based off of what someone is expressing, that we're practicing those things in our day-to-day life when things are good. We're practicing these things before we get into the conversations on transition, so that when we do get into those conversations, we're better equipped to just kind of default to that. That's why our kids are practicing fire drills in schools. Is there anything else, Bob, you'd like to add to that one?
No, I think you know, the general message is that don't expect it to be an overnight thing. So plan for it, as you said, prepare for it, and learn how to communicate in a safe and secure way, rather than let's just jump in with both. And you know, again, you got to understand that you've got a whole range of personalities in a family, and so some people are, let's get it done. Why can't we just do it like this? And other people are much more, I need time to think about this. I need time to be able to absorb and reflect on it before I can make a decision. So again, personality differences are also part of this whole learning how to communicate with each other piece.
And understanding those other personalities. That's a really good point. So knowing how they're do they need time? Like, do you start a conversation and get everyone a break, come back together? One of the things that I've heard expressed as well in conversations is a frustration that it feels like a lot of the conversation, if you're at a conference or somewhere where they have a farm transition coach talking, feels like it's geared more towards like the 30 to 35-year-old group, where looking at like that's who must be trying to go through transition right now. And I'm hearing from people that are, 40, 45, even older than 45, where they're frustrated and they feel stuck because they don't know what their future holds, where they're at a point where they need to start planning for, their retirement down the road, and they don't know what the future for their children looks like. But they're still at that group that needs to go through transition, and they don't know the when or the if or the how that's going to happen.
I think that's a good point, which you make there, Megs, is lots of times with any of these things that we're learning is a how-to. How do I do this? How do I listen? How do I understand more? And how do I go about it? And it's knowing, on the farm, we have tools to fix our machinery. Well, you need to know the tool to use and how to use it in order to fix that piece of machinery. And so these how-tos, and I had my associate when she was, dealing with family member that suicidal, 2 attempts. And it came down to the third one that she was attempting. And it was because the mother took the time to learn the tools of how to approach it, but also express her feelings of that if she was to lose her daughter to suicide, and express that honestly. And when those conversations start to happen and it put them out there, it made a difference. It saved her life, because her mom was not approaching things in a way. But when her daughter heard that she would be lost and hurt and sad and all of that, normally people don't put those feelings out when these things come apart, but she did. And the daughter didn't realize that would affect them. And that's what happens when we don't express these honest things that we need to say in a way that people hear them.
Yeah, I think to speak to your point, Megs, about who are we targeting, and the generation that might be a little older, who are still stuck because the founding generation are still controlling the ownership structures and the management structures. So where parents are in their late 70s or 80s and still haven't made that decision or haven't stepped into the process of intergenerational transition. So there's a couple of reasons why that happens, and some of it is, that sort of veteran generation is very reluctant to deal with some of this. Often it's fear, and fear, it's difficult to actually say, well, it's this, because for every person who's in the, shall we say, the founding generation, they might have different reasons for not moving forward. It might be fear of losing identity. It might be fear of losing control. It might be fear of losing status. They also might be fearful of the paradoxical nature of the decisions that have to be made. And what I mean by that is, often people are looking for the right answer. But if you understand that intergenerational transition is paradoxical, where there are things, if you make a decision one way, other things are going to suffer. And often we find in paradoxical situations in family and transition is the family is pulling in one direction and the business pulls in another. So what the business needs isn't necessarily what the family needs. And the most obvious and talked about comment is this term fair versus equal. And that is where an awful lot of that older generation gets really stuck. And they get so stuck on that one question that it's easier to defer the decision.
Yeah, I've heard it's in the will. No one's going to see the will until we pass, but then you guys will know what's going on. That's what I've heard farmers tell me that they're dealing with.
And I'll be gone, so I won't care.
Yeah.
But the problem is that they're going to leave a complete trail of devastation behind them. And I often ask for farmers who say that to me. I say, well, really, you think about, what you do leave behind is really a legacy. So do you want to leave a legacy of devastation, or do you want to leave a legacy of someone who tried? Because again, you understand that people get stuck on this, I want the right answer. And it's like, well, you're going to have, there's this kind of, we've got to pick an answer and make it work. Because again, we are challenged by the needs of the farm versus the needs of the family. So we've got it. And oftentimes it goes to this idea of fair, and everyone has a different perspective. So I can say to everyone who's listening, here's a problem, come up with a fair answer. And everyone will come up with their version of a fair answer. And they'll all be different. But they'll all be fair, but they'll just be based on individual perspectives. And so the trick, if there is a trick, is to move away from focusing on an outcome and focus on the process. Did everyone get fair process? Because then we're more likely to be able to live with an outcome that we didn't necessarily choose. So that's part of this. So when we're talking to the 45 to 55-year-olds who are stuck, often it's because they're, let's say in this case, it's their parents who are still holding on to the control. It's because those parents are stuck themselves. How do we unstick those parents? Well, we've got to have reasonable conversations. We need to be able to reassure them that they're not going to lose their status, they're not going to lose their identity, and we need to be able to reassure them that that the process is going to be fair.
Mhm.
So it's like you understand on a bell curve, there's always going to be those who are never going to come to the table. They are absolutely going to die first, and it's all going to be done by the will. So there's those people that we probably aren't going to be able to reach. But there's another sector that you could say, well, look, why don't you just come and have a conversation? It's going to cost you nothing but your time. It's going to take about an hour, and we'll just go through some of the things to give that generation, because often they're stuck on, I don't know where to start. I haven't got a clue where to start. Well, let's start with a conversation. Cost you nothing but your time, and we can talk about what the process might look like. And then get them to relax into the, okay, I understand why my 55-year-old son might need some kind of plan in place,
Yeah.
or might want actually to understand what their ownership looks like, because they've probably got a 30-year-old kid coming along who wants to take over also.
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard the focus on the process, not the outcome, because if the process is fair, then that's going to have a larger impact on individuals than what the piece of the pie actually looks like on the other end. And I think that's a great mindset to have, an awareness to have, and also trying to, you know, the piece of you just come have a conversation, you're not committed to anything, like that, but that identity piece is hard. And I like, just myself speaking from experience, I didn't grow up on a farm, moved to a grain farm in my mid-20s, became a grain farmer, and when I moved off farm, I had a bit of an identity crisis because I wasn't a farmer anymore. But I was still connected to the industry and I wanted to support the industry. And it was like, how do I exist in this space when I'm not that person anymore? So I can fully understand and feel for that. I just want to remind everyone, like, please, if you have questions or thoughts that are coming up as we're talking, throw them in the chat or unmute if that's something that you're comfortable doing. What, your comment on like there are always going to be there's sometimes that movable middle, there can be people on either end that, we're never going to change. So I guess then it just comes down to understanding for that generation that might be stuck, that those 45-year-olds, 50-year-olds, understanding like what you and your partner need and your family need. And maybe that means not just sticking around to the end. Maybe it means making an alternative plan and making a change to take care of like your mental health. Because I've heard that too, where people are, they're starting to, well, what's our plan B? Because we can't rely on this, especially when it's just this big unknown, and what's our plan B? And I think that also feeds into having that clear understanding just throughout how we approach everything, whether that's, do we stick around even though we don't know where this is going, or on the other side too of, now we're starting to hear from individuals where their kids don't want to farm. And that's equally hard on the other side, right? Of had this idea of, well, this is going to be the transition and the next generation, and they don't want to do that anymore. So having that clear understanding of what you personally want and need, and how you will be okay no matter what way that outcome ends up going.
Yeah, you
Thank-
understand that there's a couple of, like there's some tools. So it's usually men. Like again, we see an awful lot of gender bias in this work, and whether we like that or not, there are very clear traits. And older men have two very clear traits. One is heroic mission, and the other is heroic status. So if you're really stuck because dad really doesn't want to discuss it, you can spend some time appreciating dad and telling him how much you appreciate the work he's done in creating this farm. It can help them relax so that they can then begin the process of letting go. Whereas if you push up and say, Dad, it's time to leave, Dad, it's time to leave, he's going to push back. Like he's going to say, no, this is me and I built this and this, you know, so there's a little bit of subtlety in this sort of how you encourage that generation to begin the process of letting go. And certainly one of those tools for that is showing an awful lot of appreciation for the work that they've done in the past.
Again, I like what you say, Bob. It's about how you approach the situation and introduce. And lots of times we're going in with all our ideas and, oh, we need to do this, we should do this, and everything else. You're shooting all over the place. And they, the generation that's been doing it, they want to be part of the process. And, and sometimes what you can do is also go and say, I'm wanting to, I'd like to offer some ideas for you to consider, just ideas to put on the table for us to think about and give them that space of time. And that's lots of times people need space of time. And I've had that many times in my session. I need this space to think about it because not everybody can make a decision right away or think that's what I want to do. They need to process and go through that process with themselves. And that's what I think. Would you be open to hearing some ideas for you to consider and that we can maybe talk about and hear each other's perspective? And they might be more open to that. And I've heard that many times, that when you approach it in that way, rather than telling what needs to be done or we should be doing and everything else, it makes a whole big difference of that approach. And it's how do we approach this? And everybody's part of the solution, not part of the problem. If I feel like I'm part of the problem, then it becomes even more heavy duty. But if I'm part of the solution, I'm included in that process and everything else and can weigh in with my thoughts and feelings about it, and we can discuss it, it'll make a huge difference as well.
Yeah, I think that's an important note, part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because when, especially like as this goes for like drags on in some cases and you are getting older and you're trying to figure out, well, what is my future? What is the future of my adult child now at this point? It's easy to just say, to vilify that person who is the reason that transition conversation hasn't started, isn't going to start, is just been left with, this is how it is, you guys will find out when I pass, kind of thing. Looking to make them part of the solution of, okay, well, what could we, here's some ideas, but have time to think on that and bring that forward as to how we could change things so that everybody's more supported through this process. And I mean, there's enough uncertainty in agriculture already, right? That you don't know and you can't control. So how can we work together as a family unit to take a large piece of that away together?
It's also very important to understand that this is it's not an easy process, but it doesn't have to be horrendous either. But it's important that it's very difficult to achieve if you're dragging people through it. Far better that they're pushing through it. And so, again, it's this making sure that people are ready, because people who aren't ready will really struggle. So it's a lot of this setting the stage, preparing, having the discussions at the family table, trying to, like, 99% of succession planning is about communication. Like 99% of it. The technical answers are all there. You can go on Google them if you want. It's communication with the family that is the number one thing. So being able to begin to communicate, allow people to absorb and reflect, give people appreciation for their efforts, and begin to set the stage so that everyone, when we do go, okay, let's deal with this, let's go into this process formally, everybody's ready.
And I think too, and that readiness is so important. And I can talk to that a little bit just where I'm at. I'm at a stage in my life where I'm the older generation, and also with my daughter. And I always had a vision that I saw her coming into the business, but did she want to come into the business? And, you know, there was times that I even asked her husband, you know, is that of interest to her? Well, he really didn't know, and I left it and carried on with the business. And here it was just a month and a half ago that she came to me. She says, Mom, how would you be open to considering me being part of the business? And I said, when do you want to start? I always had that vision, but it was her that came to me and said that she wants to be part of the business. And she brings a perspective, like she's got an MBA, she's lived with the mental health and all the different challenges. And she even participated in the 10-week program that I do offer. And so she could get a feel for what really happens in these sessions and what happens. And so she's got a more open understanding of the process. And I welcome her because she brings skill sets and knowledge and things that could add to what I can do. And that's what brings, it's having that teamwork and going to our strengths. And lots of times each of us have different strengths, and knowing the strengths of each of our, you know, ourselves and our teammates make a huge difference, because they can bring that piece in. And there's things that she is much better at, detail and different things like that. She's so much better at that, and working through a process where sometimes I'm making decisions quicker than maybe I should. So these are things that we can all make things work in that legacy to carry on and have a chance of a legacy that could be carried on. And I know that's what many people would like to do and see.
Bob, what is your recommendation for how to bring someone like yourself into the conversation? Because that's one of the pieces I've also heard is like, well, if this family member goes out and finds someone like yourself and brings them in or tries to bring them in, then there can be this perception of like, well, now I can't trust them because so and so brought them in. They're going to cater to their interests. So, what's the best way to go about bringing someone in to assist in facilitating that process, but doing it with group support and trust?
Yeah. So you understand that the professional world out there is made up of a number of different professions. So investment advisors, bankers, accountants, lawyers, and they all bring a lens, their own lens, to the table. And often their client relationship is, my client is the person who is paying me. And therefore I have a professional bias. So I'm going to look at the succession planning through the lens of life insurance or investment. And I'm also going to work towards pleasing the person who's paying me. So in the family enterprise world, we have to change that. And so the number one rule, my number one rule, is that the family is the client, not the person writing the check. Okay, so that's my number one rule. So I'm neutral. I have no skin in the game. I have no dog in the fight. I have no fixed outcome in mind, and I don't have a lens that says I'm trying to sell you something. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. I know that all of those other professionals that I've mentioned have a part to play. And that's why any of this work requires a multidisciplinary approach. You can't just do it through the lawyer, or you can't just do it with your insurance sales. You need a multidisciplinary approach. So understanding that you can bring someone in. But then how do we assure everyone that it's not the guy who's coming isn't dad's guy? And that's where we have a chemistry meeting. And a chemistry meeting says, let's get the family members involved from the beginning. Not here's the guy I found, but here's the guy who's going to come and talk to you all so that you can all make the decision on whether you want to move forwards using that person. So chemistry is extremely important for two reasons. We're going to share an awful lot of intimate knowledge. There's going to be an awful lot of emotion. See, there needs to be trust. You need to feel comfortable, and everyone needs to feel comfortable. And if that doesn't happen, we lose trust. So that's the first point. But I also need to feel comfortable that I'm working with clients who understand what we're going to go through. Oftentimes we get challenged by clients who, I'm going to pay you and I want you to come up with the right answer. I guess we need to go to a different facilitator for that, because I don't have that skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understanding the type of a professional you're bringing in should be someone who says, I'm going to work with you. I don't have the right answer, and we are going to work collaboratively to come to whatever the right answer is. And the right answer is where we can get consensus.
Yeah, you're not coming in with a magic wand. And I was thinking while you're talking of how, if we're talking about finding a mental health professional to do counseling with, we like to say, don't just go with or feel like you need to go with the first one you meet. They may not be a good fit for you. It's kind of like dating, where you might need to try a couple different ones before you find someone that you really click with, you really feel comfortable with. And so I like that thought process for this as well, like finding someone that on both ends works on your end where you're comfortable and can work with those individuals, but that those individuals have that comfort level and that chemistry with you as well. Because you've brought up biases a couple times, but that's one of the things that I've heard from some of the women farming that I know, where they feel like there might be a bias against them when they're going through that succession planning, especially if it's a brother and a sister that are that next generation. And so especially having someone that, or all genders involved, feel comfortable supporting what their interests are moving forward, or working through that process at like that as unbiased as possible point of view.
Well, so part of my process is all family members are interviewed one-on-one, not with their spouse, not in a room. It's together. It's one-on-one, and that surfaces an awful lot of the again it comes to trust. But if you have trust and someone feels comfortable talking to you, it can surface an awful lot of stuff. So one of the focuses of this webinar is mental health, and what comes alongside mental health is obviously substance abuse and addictions, and those they can sometimes go hand in hand. And so one-on-one interviews allows us to explore some of those issues, and it helps in the process, because we have to understand that if people aren't healthy in terms of their mental health, if people aren't healthy because they have some form of addiction, they're also not going to make the right decisions. So we need to be able to understand all of that's going on. And so again, this allowing family members to understand that there really is no bias, that there really is no fixed outcome, that it really is the family's role to come to consensus, remembering that consensus isn't necessarily absolute agreement, It's just, okay, I can live with this, and this is the way it's going to go forwards. And that comes from communication every time.
And I think to add to that is, and I think part of what you're saying too, Bob, and correct me if I'm off beat here, but it's going where each person is at. Where are they at in this process? And so that they know that they feel that feeling of I matter, and also I'm heard and I'm understood, in that communication. We're back to that. We keep coming back to that. But if we can understand each person's where they're at in the process and they feel that, then it helps that process to keep forming. And the whole process is to help people to think it through. It's not telling them what to do or how to do it, because they do have their own answers. But as we said in the beginning, emotions sometimes get in it and muddy the situation. But if we can have these conversations where we can just look at one piece of what we can start with, and start with one step at a time. And what is that first step? Maybe just to hear what everybody is feeling and thinking, or however they want to express it, and be where they're at so each person hears it. Each person has a voice in some way.
And maybe there's, we are here to also bring mental health into this. And Bob, your comments on substance abuse and addiction, often there's underlying mental health challenges that are not being addressed there. And so people turn to alcohol or to other things. So that might actually be the starting place for some families, right? If you have family members within your dynamic that are struggling, even if it's with something that's undiagnosed, but is showing up as substance abuse or other things, that might be the place where to start the conversation is, okay, how do, and Mona, to your comments, it's not just the person getting help, it's all of us learning and getting support as well through that process. But starting there before trying to get into the farm transition and succession planning, so that you have healthier individuals starting to have those conversations, instead of coming from a place where there could be underlying things that are heavily influencing how they're perceiving or processing things, or not processing things.
Yeah. And I think it's, I know that we have a family dynamics characteristic sheet that families do before they even start doing some of this work. And they tick their boxes on that piece of paper for themselves. Each person does that. But through a process, when we start a process, is okay, that's where they are right now. That's where they are at. But here is if we learn some pieces of what we can do differently, and communication keeps coming up. Maybe we start with the communication that we can express this and feel okay to express it and put these things out. But also, when people are going through a process or through any counseling or programs or whatever, they want to know that they're making some progress. And that's one thing that has shown up many times is, am I getting anywhere? Is this moving anywhere? Because it seems slow when you start a process. And when you can show them, and I'm taking that characteristic list, I want to say, and they've ticked 10 pieces of what their issue is, what they said it was. And then we learned something different of how to approach it, like what's all been said in here today. Trying one thing of what maybe was said today, and let's try it and let's see what works. But also in that process, and you do it again, say 2 or 3 weeks down the road, maybe go back to that sheet and just check it. Oh, this has changed because of how I approached it, or how this was approached. But seeing that progress makes a huge difference for individuals too.
Just gonna pause before we keep going. I haven't noticed anything in the chat, so just wanted to see if anyone didn't feel comfortable interrupting the flow of conversation, but had questions before we move forward, even if they're logistical. Because I've had a couple of questions kind of pop into my head as Bob's been talking, because I haven't been through this. So one of mine was, well, Bob, would you help find the other people that need to be part of the process so that it's not just that family looking for it? So just curious if there is anyone with questions right now that's been kind of waiting for the end, if they wanted to post them in the group chat or to just unmute and ask yourselves, feel free to do so.
if you want me to answer that question, the answer is yes. It's
Okay.
obvious. Like some families come with their own relationships already formed, and like as in I already have a really good lawyer. I already have a good accountant. Others come where they have no relationship. So again, I don't like using the term quarterback because it really does need to be a collaborative thing, and quarterback seems to imply that some level of control. Whereas, so it's really just
Connector.
managing
Yeah.
and managing the process to say, okay, in this instance, you really do need a lawyer's opinion. Here's someone who could help you, or here's a list of people who could help you.
Yeah. Is providing options for individuals to think about and maybe what they feel is going to fit for them to help them.
Mona,
Yes,
what are, oh, sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Well, it's very important for the family to understand that if I give you the answer, it's my answer. And I am going to give you an answer that I think works, but it might not be what works for you. And so as a family, you need to work through a process that comes to you. And in that, you get to prioritize, because there'll be a whole list of to-dos. Like most succession plans have a whole list of things, boxes you want to tick. Well, I might suggest that the priority is getting the wills done, but the family might say, well, no, our priority is actually the transition of management. So, it's very important that and it can be a frustrating thing for families, because sometimes they come with this very fixed idea that the professional is going to give them the answer and we're going to get it done and it's going to be done. And it just isn't. And that's possibly one of the reasons why people resist this so much is you're dealing with paradoxes that don't have a right or wrong answer, and you're dealing with ambiguity. And farm families are notorious because they don't like it. They're more used to dealing with things like, I know how many bushels of grain I have, I know how many cows I have, I can lift it, I can push it, I can drive it. This succession planning process, can't prod it, I can't, and it doesn't have an identifiable outcome, and it feels very ambiguous, and it feels frustrating. And by the way, it's costing me money.
Right.
Yeah, and these are all things that, oh my God, I can't get this. Why? And then so do you know what? I'm just not going to do it.
Mona, what would be some recommendations for reducing the barriers for connecting with mental health support, either maybe as part of the process or prior to, or maybe something that just happens on the side for certain individuals? But what could I do as an individual, or what could I do as a family member to support someone?
I think, lots of times, and I know through the whole process, even my own beginning and even now, and I hear it quite often, people need to know that you have lived through an experience of some sort and that they can relate to. And I think that's part of it. I know for ourselves, when our daughter was diagnosed, had no clue of what bipolar was and how to approach it and everything else. And I was referred to an individual who lives with bipolar disorder. And that was the person that helped me so much in that whole process, so that she gave me input from their point of view so I could understand where my daughter was coming from a point of view. And so that lived experience does help, but it's also the part of the tools that we need to do and how we approach it. And all of, those pieces, and hearing from somebody that's lived it. And I asked individuals that were living with mental health, and what was the best thing that I could do as a mom to help someone, help my loved one. And they just wanted to feel that they have some control of their lives. They don't feel that in control lots of times, their self-esteem and their self-confidence. So it's building up that confidence, and listen to them and ask them, what do you think you need to do about this? What can we do together about this? But they're part of that thinking process and how to approach it. And that's where it makes a difference of that transition, because if you're not listening and you're going into fix, and you're going to fix the problem, you're going to not win. I can say that honestly, because I've seen it time and time again, where the fixing, you're trying to fix the person's situation, fix this, but learn more about where they're at. Have them part of the conversation of what is working for you right now. That's one question you can ask. And the second one is, what can I do different, or what is not working? Because when you ask those two questions, and you never want to know what's not working, but that's the one you need to hear very strongly, because that's what you need to work on. And so these are the pieces that I think that are so critical to that. And I'm hoping I'm answering your question, Megs.
I think that's also a good time for me to plug Ag Talk, which is a peer-to-peer support platform for anyone 16 years and older connected to agriculture. It's free, it's fully anonymous, and so nobody knows that that's you posting, but it's a place to connect with individuals with shared life experience. It could be a place to ask that exact question that Mona said, of like, how do I support this person, or how can I try to connect this person? What worked for you? Maybe you're trying to get a partner, a spouse, to connect with someone who, is a mental health professional, but you're not having luck connecting to someone else who has gone through that and might have some tips that are unique to you. The other thing that's really cool about Ag Talk is it's a place to build a community. So maybe you're in a good place, you've been through farm transition, you've been through some other things, and you can actually be there as a resource to other people that are going to go be looking for support. Michaela has shared that in the group chat. And Ag Talk is also monitored 24/7 by mental health professionals. So there also are clinicians on there to assist everyone in their own mental health journeys, or to be that safety net if someone's not in a good place. So really recommend sharing that. I know that, one of the barriers for seeking mental health support in agriculture can sometimes be the fact that margins are tight and we don't have insurance plans, and sometimes, or we can't drive multiple hours round trip to go connect with someone. So this is something you can do on your phone. No one needs to know you're doing it, and it's free.
I think it's actually also important. A lot of times people don't realize the size of the problem, and the word shame comes into this. And so there should be no shame in this. The families I work with, almost 50% of them will have someone with some level of mental health or addiction issue somewhere in the family. So it's a very large problem that's going on silently out there in our rural communities. And so, I think it's important that people understand that there are an awful lot of families that are going through and sharing the experience that you are going through yourselves.
Yeah. And I think too, with the groups, when there's group sessions and everything else, that's where I have found families. And I know for myself, just even part of the process that I had to go through, but in the groups, all of a sudden, you realize that you're not alone. You are not the only one going through these challenges. And when you're in a group, you build a bond, especially when you've gone through a process together, and you learn from the other people. Like, people have have had some successes, they don't necessarily recognize those successes, but then when they hear somebody else going through something similar and they found that something worked, they share that. So these group dynamics do make a huge difference in people having the relief, not feeling isolated, not alone, all of that. And that's the impact. And when you're helping a loved one, if you are approaching and you're getting the help that you maybe need to know how to support the loved one, that may encourage the loved one to basically go and get some help rather than the family trying to push them to do that help. And actually that ripple effect is starting. And when the families get some tools and some help and everything else, and however they want to do it, whether it's talking to an individual that's lived it or whatever, but learning how to approach it, it's a ripple effect that happens when the family does get the help. And it's nothing to be ashamed of at all. I think Brené Brown says it best, it's vulnerability, but it's vulnerability that it's your putting it out on the table. And the thing is, and as it was said to my daughter, and it was a doctor that actually put down mentally ill at this time, and she felt very, very hurt. And as was said to her by a friend, she says, that says more about them than you. If you're the one that is living with this and your family's living with it, but you reach out and get the help, kudos to you. You're starting a process to have relationships and health and wellness in the family for a longer term.
And that actually takes a lot of bravery
takes a
to say,
lot of
hey,
bravery.
something's going on that I need help with, and actually reach out for help.
Yeah.
And just on that note too, there are different peer groups out there that are kind of more peer groups just for farming as a whole. I know FCC runs some. I'm not sure about MMP. I know there's different people in the industry that run more private or individual peer groups, but that can be a really great resource too, so that it's not just, I mean, I've joined some to talk mental health before. I know they talk transition, they talk economics, they talk all the different things, but that can be a great place to you know, bounce ideas, know that you're not alone, create community, something that, you know, sometimes can really assist in feeling like we all are alone, or that isolation that can be felt on farm. But those peer groups can be a really great support for just all of the things that can come up when you are farming and working in this industry. Bob, do you have any, you know, top 3, top 5, if someone's, you know, on the call right now, or they're going to watch this later and they're like, we're at the stage where we need to start, but we don't know where to start?
Well, start with, you know, reaching out to someone like myself who says, okay, I can put you on the track, and I'm not coming with any bias. If you don't find me a good fit, I can point you in the right direction. So start by, you know, let's find someone who is going to give us some guidance. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, try not to get this done in a week. Like this is a very long process. Embrace it. The process is the most important thing, not the end. Because the end, if I'm honest, and I don't want to scare people, it's when you engage in this is an ongoing thing. Like there's not a switch where it's done. So, you know, understand that you're engaging in a process that has no defined timeline. There are things that you will get done along the way so that you can see progress. But when you get to the end, you might have to start again, because now the third generation is coming through. So it's just something like that. If you embrace the process, then you embrace the discovery that you're going to go through as a family, and you're going to embrace the development of ideas. again, people try and rush to this right answer. Well, who knows what that right answer is if we don't go through a process of discovery. And as human beings, we're probably not the best people to go, oh, you know what, I know exactly what I want and I'm going to get there. There might be a few out there. There might be the Richard Bransons or the Elon Musks of this world who know that. But most of us, we don't know that. So we need to go through a process of discovery before we can really find where we want to end up, where we want to go. So certainly find yourself someone who's going to start you and then allow yourself time. Don't try and get this done. So that's, you understand that there's two pieces to this intergeneration transition. One is what's called the what. That's the list of things to do. But nobody struggles with the list of things to do. People struggle with the how do I do it? And it's the how piece that we're mainly trying to work on.
And I think, you know, looking at how it's the process and it's, you know, it's not going to happen in this set amount of time, you know, really speaks to the sooner you can start this process and start these conversations, the better, because I don't think adding a timeline because you're worried about someone's health or longevity is going to, you know, that just adds pressure to the whole situation. It's going to be beneficial to anybody.
I have one question that I'd like to pose out to all the people here today. Is you've heard input from Megs, you've heard input from Bob, and you've heard input from me. What is one small step of what you would take today from the information you learned today to get started? What's one piece that you can look at, because it is baby steps, and think about what is that first step that I do today to initiate whatever the pieces that you want to start, and think about that.
I like that. Thanks, Mona. And you can either unmute or share in the chat, or maybe you just write that down. Maybe you've been taking notes and you just write that down and come back to it. Maybe you make a note in your phone, but come back to that. Maybe you need some time to think on it, but write that question down and have that be something that you come back to, because this is a topic that it is so large that just the weight and the how and the all of it can put us into that freeze mode, right? Where we're just like, I can't take any steps forward because I don't know how to approach this. And so when we're able to break things down, and maybe you break things down into, this is what I want to happen over the next 5 years. Maybe you break things down over, this is what I need to do in the next month. And maybe that's just making some phone calls to someone like Bob and having some conversations, but breaking it down into pieces that you feel comfortable with, that allow you to take yourself out of that freeze state and start to move forward. And sometimes the size of those pieces are going to change, and that could depend on what all is going on in your world, what's influencing what's already on your plate, how you're feeling about everything, or just where you're at with the process and how that point of the process is feeling. Maybe that takes more emotional space, and so you need to move things back down to smaller pieces.
We always say, you eat an elephant one bite at a time.
I like that.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd ever eat an elephant, but it's a great image. And I do know that there's, I've had a message from Carmen, who's with AFSC. If you are in Alberta, there are going to be some workshops coming up. So I'll copy and paste these, because again, these could be great places where maybe that's your first step. Not that you need to work with MMP, not that you need to work with Bob, not that you need to work with whoever, but just a first step to gaining some more information and starting to feel maybe more comfortable with the topic and how you want to take that next step.
Yeah.
And any other questions before we wrap things up? I really appreciate everyone's time here today. Sorry, learning how to post in the chat. But yeah, just, this is we're going to wrap things up in a couple of minutes, but if there's any final questions, any thoughts maybe on what you've heard today, feel free to direct message me if you want me to share them, or Michaela, or feel free to unmute too if you're comfortable with that. But would love to, yeah, just hear some reflections or anything that kind of came up for you as we moved through the last hour and a half.
Maybe we answered all their questions.
I doubt it. It was a great chat though. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
That's one thing if people wanted to put, share with you and whatever. What is one thing that they learned today that they didn't, think about? What is one thing that there's a learn there, a takeaway that they could take away today?
And I haven't really talked about Do More much, but Do More, we're the national voice and champion for mental health in Canadian agriculture. We do a lot of stuff like this. We bring workshops into rural communities with our partnership with FCC. I do a lot of public speaking across Canada as well. So if you're ever looking to connect to Do More for maybe hosting something like this or bringing something into your community, we'll be launching our community fund for 2024 soon. You can always find stuff on our website, domore.ag. We have a ton of resources there. We break them out by national, provincial. Now we're at a stage where a lot of provinces have some free counseling that you can access as well. Sometimes that's unlimited, sometimes it's limited, but you can go through our website to learn what's there. And then we also have a wellness tips page where maybe you want to Google like how to top 10 tips for dealing with stress during harvest. There's probably a post on that. So wealth of information there. I'm going to share my email if anyone would like to connect with me personally. But Bob, Mona, if you guys are comfortable sharing your contact information in the chat, I'm sure there are people that would possibly like to reach out moving forward.
You've now challenged my technological expertise.
I'm making you use the chat.
I'm sure I'll get there somehow.
And just with the short amount of time we have left, I just want to give another big thank you to AFSC for their continued support, not only of Do More Agriculture, but of mental health in agriculture in general, mental health of farmers and what they're doing to support the generation that is farming now, is going to be farming next year, and just all of the things that they do, that we do together. There'll be more of these webinars coming up throughout the year. So stay tuned for those either through AFSC's newsletters that they send out or through Do More Social as well. Kevin, thank you very much for doing opening remarks this morning for us. And Bob and Mona, thank you both so much for joining today, for everything that you shared. This is the second year we've done one for Farm Transition Day, and I'm still learning things. So thank you both very much for your time and your expertise today.
Thank you, Megs.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you, Bob.
Yeah, and you. Thanks.
Okay, take care, everyone.